shoot, it doesn't show the. Let's go search here. I'll go for image. So here's inside that house that is a museum to Nietzsche. You can see a picture of Hitler there where he's not only receiving the walking stick from Elizabeth, but he's paying homage to Nietzsche. Thinking, here it is. So this picture is that's Nietzsche's sister Elizabeth. Wagner. I thought for sure that picture was on here, so it's got to be down here somewhere. There it is. As you can see, Elizabeth is handing Hitler Nietzsche's walking stick. And why is that important? Part of that is the last book published by her, not by Nietzsche, is The Will to Power. And that book was edited by her in order to support the Nazi Party. And there's an interesting argument by lots of folks that like Nietzsche and don't like Hitler, arguing that it's Elizabeth's fault that Nietzsche's work has supported the Third Reich and the Nazi regime, that Hitler considered Nietzsche to be, such a great philosopher a philosopher of the Third Reich, not a living one, obviously, since he died in 1900, but that he ordered his Schutzstaffel, his SS troops, to carry, instead of a pocket New Testament, which I don't know if you've ever been in the army, they offer you New Testaments, usually camouflaged New Testaments. That's kind of interesting. So you could read them while you're being bombed, I guess. I don't know. But in any case, Hitler didn't want his troops reading the Bible. He wanted them reading Nietzsche's work, Thus Spake Zarathustra, which also sprach Zarathustra. Thus Spake Zarathustra. Where he talks about the Übermensch, and Hitler wanted all of his troops. In fact, he wanted all the people of the Third Reich, the so-called Aryan race, which is fictitious, actually. Lots of amazing ideas come from leaders that we're not sure where they get these ideas. They're totally false. They come up with things, and people like them. They like that idea, even though it's totally fictitious. But in any case, he wanted all of his troops to be Übermenschen. And Übermenschen simply means an overman or a superman. When Übermensch was first translated into English, it was almost translated as Superman, but there was a comic book hero called Superman, and the editors didn't want to confuse it with that, so they called it the Overman. Or what normally happens now is we just leave it Übermensch and figure you have to get used to the idea of calling it that instead of translating it into English. Uber just means over, and Mensch is yes. Pardon?
Person, human.
Human person. You're a real mensch, you know. You're a good guy, basically. It's kind of interesting. But Uber Salzburg means, the little town that's above Salzburg. And that could be like higher up on the river or something. Usually Oberkochen is Kochen is the river, and Uberkochen is over the river. Easy word. Sounds very much like over. Anyway. So he's very young when he's in the seminary and starts reading newer biblical criticism. And the biblical criticism wanted to basically, even though this is much later than Spinoza, but remember Spinoza got in trouble for interpreting the Bible as written by man. And trying to analyze it. Who's the audience? What was the author trying to say to who, etc. And so that kind of biblical criticism became more and more popular. I think I mentioned Albert Schweitzer and the quest for the historical Jesus, for example, right? But so you get this biblical criticism where scholars are now looking at the Bible and treating it like a human written work instead of the God writing it. And you get all, sorts of criticisms. And of course, if you're a young man in a church environment, you hear the orthodox teachings that are aimed at children. And you believe that stuff as a kid. And I suppose for many people still today, you grow up still believing that stuff, right? But if you're made aware of contemporary scholarship and biblical criticism, you begin questioning that. And in fact, that's what happened to Nietzsche. He was horrified. That meant that he started questioning his faith, and not only questioning his faith, but he irritated his sister, he irritated his mother. Remember, his father had already died, but he irritated the whole family with his concern about the biblical criticism. And it threw him for a loop, and he didn't know what to do with himself because he didn't want to be a minister anymore. And then famously, he's in a bookshop, and he happens to fall upon a book by this guy. I can't remember if I talked. I'd say Friedrich. Arthur Schopenhauer. Did I talk about Schopenhauer at all? A little bit? Maybe not. The only person that liked him was his dog. Did I tell you that already? And in fact, you can imagine why his dog liked him. You could see his dog almost looked like him. Isn't that hilarious? He had a full-size poodle. I don't know if he only had one. I mean, poodles live, about 15 years? Anybody have a full-size standard poodle? How long does he live? He's famous. Maybe it was only one poodle. I don't know.
Poodles live 12 to 15 years.
Thanks.
Small ones live 14 to 18.
Yeah, smaller dogs tend to live longer and annoy their owners for much longer than the big ones.
Those are like $4,000 dogs, like crazy expensive dogs. Because they're like show poodles half the time.
I don't think I would buy one. I have Saint Bernard. I'm a Saint Bernard fan.
You can get them haircuts. So on
Oh
top
yeah,
of
they
buying
gotta
it,
trim
you
them
have
to
to
give
trim.
them coiffure. You know, you have to have a poofy legs. And that might be one reason why well, that sounds sexist. I don't want to get into that. But so Schopenhauer was the son of the richest man in Europe at the time, and the father wanted him to become an excellent businessman so he could take over the family business. Schopenhauer wasn't interested in business, wasn't interested in being starting at the bottom of his father's business and learning the trade and working his way up. Wasn't interested in that. Instead ended up in college in Berlin studying philosophy, and Hegel was his PhD, one of his PhD panel, and his PhD thesis was against Hegel's philosophy, and yet Hegel passed him, despite the fact that he was highly critical of Hegel's philosophy. Once he finished his PhD, he decided to teach in Berlin, and he promised that within 2 years Hegel would have no more students. He would have all the students. But within 2 years he had no students, and Hegel had more students than ever. And so he quit and went and spent the rest of his life in Frankfurt am Main in a nice, rich, new apartment with his dog, and spent his days going to the cafe and getting his meals there and writing, although the books that he published were all the same. And his book, his main book, was The World as Will and Representation. And his answer, and I consider him just a poor response to Hegel's philosophy, followed Kant. And if you remember, Kant argued that there's the noumena that's outside of the phenomena that we can experience. Hegel kind of superseded that by saying that actually everything is part of our experience, and therefore, the social sociality of reason, everything is dialectically within our consciousness, so to speak. But for Kant, there's this element that's outside of our ability to know, and Schopenhauer agreed with that as opposed to accepting Hegel and his contemporaries' point of view. And for Schopenhauer, what was outside of phenomena was the will. He called it the will. And the will was really influenced by his study of Buddhism. He was, there were obviously others studying Buddhism in European philosophy at the time. I remember even in Hegel's encyclopedia, he talks about Buddhism. He describes it quite lengthily, actually. But for Schopenhauer, Buddhism is kind of his main idea, and he thinks of karma or fate, the will that's out there that's against us, as essentially a true interpretation of just how miserable life is. So as a result, his philosophy is very depressing. Karma is going to bite you on the ass no matter what you do. The best thing is to just suffer through it. Suffer through it. That's all. Just face it and suffer through it. This philosophy not only influenced Nietzsche, as he finds this book in a bookshop and reads it, and it's like, oh, his mind splits open, as that happens to young people. and he figures this is the answer. Yay, Schopenhauer. But Nietzsche wasn't the only one. The other one that was influenced by Schopenhauer was Wagner. And Wagner is a composer who writes